Hey everybody, today's lesson is on factoring polynomials. This is kind of a hard lesson for some students to understand sometimes, so I'm really worried about how well I may be able to explain it to you with me not being actually there with you. I'm going to do the best that I can to explain how to factor polynomials, but I will be including a video from another site also for you to watch in case my explanation isn't good enough for you. The first example of factoring polynomials that I have for you is x squared minus 7x minus 18. What you have to do is, if you look at what I have written in red underneath the problem, it says look at the last term, which is negative 18, and think of two numbers that when you multiply them together will give you negative 18 and will add to give the second term of negative 7. So once again, you want to first look at the last term, which in this case is negative 18, and think of two numbers that when you multiply together will give you negative 18, but when you add those two numbers, they should give you the middle term, which is negative 7. Well, if you think about negative 9 and positive 2, when you multiply negative 9 and positive 2, you get negative 18. And when you add negative 9 and positive 2, it gives you negative 7. So that's how you know that the two factors of x squared minus 7x minus 18 would be x minus 9 and x plus 2. If you see what I have written there in green, I'm still learning how to navigate this thing. You will see that I've written that negative 9 times 2 is negative 18, and negative 9 plus 2 is negative 7. So just make sure you remember what I have written there in red. That's what you're going to be using or thinking about each time you need to factor a polynomial. The second example I have for you is x squared minus 16x plus 63. Now, thinking of the rule, you need to think of two numbers that when multiplied together will give you positive 63, and then when you add those same two numbers, it will give you negative 16. Well, if you think of negative 9 and negative 7, two negatives multiplied together make a positive. So we know that negative 9 times negative 7 will give us positive 63. But when we add negative 9 to negative 7, that gives us negative 16, which is our middle term. So that shows us that the two factors for number 2 would be x minus 9, x minus 7. Problem number 3 is x squared minus 13x equals 30. Well, the first thing you have to do here is you need to get all three of your terms on the same side of the equation. So as you guys know, anytime you move something from one side of the equation to the other, you have to change the sign. So since we have a positive 30 on the right-hand side of the equals, we just need to move that 30 to the left to get all three of our terms on the same side, which would change that from a positive 30 to a negative. So that gives us the polynomial x squared minus 13x minus 30. So now we want to think of two numbers that when multiplied together will give us negative 30, and when we add those two numbers, they will give us negative 13. So if you think of negative 15 times positive 2, that will give you negative 30. And when you add negative 15 to positive 2, that gives you negative 13. So the two factors for number 3 would be x minus 15, x plus 2. Now the fourth example is a little bit different. On this fourth example, it says, sometimes you can factor out the GCF, or the greatest common factor, first. So if you look at the example for number 4, it gives you 10r squared plus 20r minus 1200. Well, anytime you have one like this, and the way this is different, first of all, is in the previous 3 examples, our first term was just simply x squared. We didn't have a coefficient in front of that first term, which made it a whole lot simpler. But on one like this, where you do have a coefficient in front of your first term, you want to first of all see if there is a greatest common factor that you can factor out. In this case, there is a 10 that is the greatest common factor of all three of those terms. So if we take the 10 out, that's going to leave us with the polynomial r squared plus 2r minus 120. Now, the way I got that was I simply said 10r squared divided by 10, which would give me the r squared. 20r divided by 10 would leave me with 2r, and 1200 divided by 10 would leave me with 120. So then I just bring my 10 down, and I'm going to do what I've now done in the previous three examples. I think of two numbers that when multiplied together will give me negative 120, and added together will give me positive 2. In this case, if we multiply positive 12 times negative 10, that gives us negative 120. And if we add positive 12 to negative 10, that gives us the positive 2, that's our middle term. So anytime you can factor out a greatest common factor, make sure that you try that first. That's only going to be whenever you have a coefficient in front of the first term. If that would have just been r squared, there would have been no greatest common factor for you to take out. Now, I'm afraid this last example may blow some of your minds. The first thing I want you to look at is where I wrote in green at the bottom of this board that there is no GCF. If you look at your three terms, you have 7x squared, 31x, and 20. You guys know that 7 is a prime number and 31 is a prime number, so there is no greatest common factor here. What you have to do on problems like this, lots of times, guys, it is simply going to be trial and error. You're just going to have to work and work until you find the one that works. Now, you know that to get 7x squared, since 7 is a prime number, you have to have 7x in one of your sets of parentheses and then simply x in the other one, because that's the only way you're going to be able to get the 7x squared. So now you still have to think of what are two numbers that when multiplied together will give me negative 20, but you can't so much as think of they're going to have to add to give negative 31, because the 7 in front of the x messes all of that up. So what I try to do is I think of two numbers that when I multiply them would give me negative 20, and I think of 4 and 5. And I think, okay, if I take 7 and multiply that by 5, it's going to give me a 35, and then a 4 times x is going to give me a 4. I can get 31 out of 35 and 4. The way I can do that is I say 7x times negative 5 plus 4 times x would give me negative 31, which is my middle term. And then, of course, if I take my last two or my outer terms in each set, 4 times negative 5 would give me negative 20. Like I said, this comes from years of practice for me. I lots of times can just look at it and figure out what I need to use as my factors to get the negative 20. You guys may have to play around with that in order to figure out that, but sometimes it just comes down to you guys having to plug in numbers and work it out until you get the one that works. So that's our lesson today on factoring polynomials. Like I said, I hope this hasn't been too confusing for you. As always, shoot me an email or give me a call at the number that's listed on my Power School page if you have any questions or concerns. I will try to find a good video that's not me that might explain this to you better if all I did was confuse you. Hope you guys are staying safe and hope you're well. I love you guys, and I hope to see you soon.